The first time a cop pressed a gun to my head, I was barefoot in my own backyard. I was holding a glass of water, not a weapon, and the man who hit me across the face swore I couldn't possibly own the house behind me. His palm cracked across my cheek so hard I saw white for a second. Next thing I knew, I was on the stone face scraping hot tile towel half hanging off my shoulders, and his voice was in my ear barking, "Get on your knees!" Which was funny in a sick way because I was already down. The sun was cooking that patio, my skin was burning, my heart was pounding, and 4 guns were pointed at me like I was a threat to the whole neighborhood. My name is Jordan Price, and that day started like any other too-hot afternoon in Ridgeview, this shiny little gated pocket on the good side of town. I finished a remote call, grabbed a quick swim, wrapped a towel around my shoulders, and stepped out into my yard with a glass of cold water. Just breathing, just enjoying the one thing I fought my whole life to get back, that patch of ground they took from my father. On the other side of the hedge, my 70-something neighbor, Mr. Whitaker, was peeking through his curtains. He saw a shirtless black man in a nice yard holding something reflective, and his brain filled in the blanks the way a lot of brains in this country have been trained. He picked up his landline and said, "Yeah, there's a black guy walking around the house next door. Looks like he's trying to get in. He's holding something, might be a weapon." You know exactly how that sounds on a 911 screen. Somewhere downtown, a dispatcher typed, "Black male with suspicious object," and hit a little box that says, "High risk." And with one keystroke, I went from homeowner to problem. I didn't know any of that yet. All I heard at first were engines. When you live in a quiet cul-de-sac, 2 cruisers at once sound wrong, like thunder on a clear day. Tires hit the gravel, doors slammed, and before I could set my glass down, my side gate flew open, and 4 officers poured into my yard with their hands already on their guns. The one in front, heavy-set redneck buzzcut that was Sergeant Brad Loomis. He walked like he owned the place, pointed at me and yelled, "Hands up, back away from the house." I raised my hands, the water sweating down the side of the glass, and said, "Sir, this is my property, we can talk." Nice and slow, exactly how every black parent teaches their kid to sound when they see blue lights. He didn't want to talk, he wanted a show. "Who you working for, Gardner?" he snapped, marching closer. "Who lives here?" I blinked, sunlight in my eyes, heart hammering hard enough to make my fingers tingle, and said, "I live here. My name is on the deed." He laughed right in my face, that ugly laugh people use when they want to make sure you feel small. "Your house," he said, leaning on the word like it tasted bad. "Sure, and I'm the mayor." Behind him, the younger cop on the right looked uncomfortable, lifted his radio a little, and said, "Sarge, I can just run the property record." Loomis cut him off with a look. "You think I need a screen to tell me what kind of guy this is?" he said, never taking his eyes off me. The whole time I was fighting 2 things at once, everything my body wanted to do, which was fight back or run, and everything my brain knew would get me killed if I tried. So I went with option 3. I tilted my wrist just enough to brush the underside of my smartwatch and double-tapped the emergency shortcut I built years ago and never thought I'd use. No lights, no sound, just one short vibration on my skin as my watch sent 2 pings, one to my lawyer, one to a quiet federal system I used to work with back when I did contracts for the government, a system that watches people like Sergeant Loomis. "Drop that thing and get on your knees," he barked again, pointing at my glass like it was a gun. I glanced down at the water, then back up at him and said, "It's a drink. I'm in my yard. I'm not resisting." My voice was shaking more than I wanted, but I stayed still, hands open, fingers spread every inch of me screaming to move. Loomis stepped right into my space till I could smell coffee and cigarettes on his breath. "Listen, Price," he said, reading my last name off my mail on the patio table like it offended him. "This neighborhood is where money lives. People like you come here to trim hedges. And yeah, that one landed because my dad used to do exactly that, cut grass in a neighborhood he used to own a house in. See, 30 years before this, on almost this exact spot, my father, Leonard Price, got labeled non-compliant and pushed out of his home with a smile and a stack of papers. He was told his place was unsafe, that he needed repairs he couldn't afford, that if he just signed the city and a company called Ironcrest Partners would help redevelop the area, for the community. What they actually did was take his keys, drag his name through a file room, and flip his block into luxury homes. I grew up on the other side of town, listening to him tell that story from behind a steering wheel parked just far enough away from this cul-de-sac that security would leave us alone. "That row used to be ours," he'd say, staring at houses with 3-car garages and perfect lawns. "We had a porch swing right where that damn fountain is now." His hands so tight on the wheel his knuckles went white. I didn't get it back then, I just knew he was angry all the time. It wasn't until I started working in cybersecurity, hunting down digital paper trails for a living, that I realized there was nothing random about what happened to him. His name was in a file with a bunch of other names, same neighborhood, same wording, same outcome, and Ironcrest was on every last page. So yeah, when Loomis called me gardener in my own yard, something deep in my chest snapped, but I swallowed it, looked him in the eye and said, "You don't have to believe me, but the deed does. My lawyer does, the tax office does." And that's when he slapped me. The sound cracked off the stucco like someone broke a board. My head whipped sideways, glass flew out of my hand and bounced across the tile. My knees buckled and I went down hard. The stone was so hot it burned my shoulder through my skin. My cheek tasted like metal, and I heard him say, "Now you understand who gives orders here." What he didn't see, at least not yet, was my neighbor's college-age son Malik standing on his own driveway with his phone up, streaming the whole thing live. You can still hear his voice shaking in that clip. "They're putting this man on the ground in his own yard, y'all seeing this?" Viewers flooded in, chat exploded, and right in the middle of the comments, a little gray-haired profile popped up and wrote, "They did the same thing to a man named Leonard Price on that land in '95, said he was resisting when they took his house." That was my father, that was the year, and seeing his name in a random stranger's comment while I was face down in my backyard, yeah, that did something to me. Eventually they backed off, partly because my lawyer Evelyn Hart barreled through the gate with her heels clicking and a folder in her hand. She lifted it like a badge and said, "Sergeant, this is the deed to this property. My client's name is on every page. You might want to stop talking before you make our job easier." Partly because Malik's live stream was already spinning out of their control, they left mad heavy boots on my tile, promising there would be a report, and trust me, there was. By that evening, a summary of incident had magically appeared saying I was agitated, non-compliant, reaching toward an unknown object. Same words they stamped on my dad's file when he begged them not to take his house. You know what I mean. But they forgot who they were writing about this time. I'm not just some guy who works a 9 to 5. I am extremely annoying when it comes to data. It's literally my job. I went into my dad's old study. The one room I never repainted sat under that ugly yellowed ceiling. He loved, opened my laptop and started pulling logs. Dispatch audio, car, GPS, body cam metadata. All of it leaves fingerprints. The report said, safety mode was activated immediately upon contact with a hostile subject. The actual system file said it was turned on almost 2 minutes later, right after the sound spike that matched his slap. The body cam video marked corrupted still had a handful of frames showing his hand on my shoulder and my face on the tile. No sign of me reaching for a weapon, and my own cameras, which back up to an off-site server, because I don't trust anyone, had the whole thing from my kitchen window. Right when I was stitching that together, I heard something slide across my doormat. Opened the front door and found a plain envelope. No name, no address, just a little shaky blue triangle drawn in the corner, the same kind of mark I had seen on old photos of my dad's house sprayed on the siding before they bulldozed it. Inside was one line in shaky handwriting. "It isn't over this time, signed G. Knox." That name hit me like a ghost because my father used to keep a photocopy of a memo from a city clerk named Gerald Knox, warning that Ironcrest was using bogus, unsafe notices to push black families out of older neighborhoods after he wrote that he vanished from the record. Now here he was again, decades later, leaving notes on my floor. I took that envelope to Evelyn. She read it once, sighed, and said, "All right, Jordan, this isn't just about your face. This is about your father's file coming back to bite them." She called in a retired federal investigator. She trusted Donovan and a young reporter named Tessa, who had a whole folder of complaints against Loomis and Ironcrest that no editor in town wanted to touch. We sat around my dining table that night with coffee going cold, spreading out old eviction records, recent complaints, property transfers, and, yeah, a lot of blue triangles. It wasn't a conspiracy theory board with yarn and push pins, but it wasn't far off. The more lines we drew, the less random it looked. Somebody on the other side must have felt that because 2 nights later, just after midnight, my house went dark. Not like a storm, not like the power company. Everything died at once. Lights, router, camera, hub, total silence. A second later, my back door rattled. There was a pop at the frame, and then Loomis walked into my kitchen with 2 of his guys, all of them in gloves. No body cams, faces set like they were taking out trash. One went down the hall, ripping camera cords. The other smashed the control box off the wall. Loomis walked right up to my desk and swept an external drive onto the floor with the back of his hand. "You made a mess," he said, voice low and slurred around the edges. I could smell cheap whiskey. Now we gotta clean it up. Before I could answer, one of them shoved me into a chair, yanked my arms back, held me there like we were in an interrogation room I sure hadn't agreed to sit in. Thing is, they didn't know me well enough to know I never put all my eggs in one basket. The main system was down, sure, but in the top corner of the living room, tucked into a beam where no one ever looks, there was a backup camera the size of my thumb battery powered on a separate network, blinking away and quietly sending every frame to that same off-site server. I looked up at it for half a second, then back at Loomis and said, "You forgot something." He smirked. "Yeah, what's that?" "Your GPS is on," I told him, "and the federal system still remembers your name." For a split second, he froze, just enough time for his two buddies to exchange a look because they knew about that little investigation into his off-duty work. They just assumed no one was watching right now. Problem for them was when I hit the panic shortcut in my yard the first time, it didn't just ping Evelyn, it also logged his patrol car ID in the kind of database you do not want to be on. Over at a federal operations center, some poor night shift tech was staring at a map going, why is Officer Loomis's unit parked at the victim's house in the middle of the night with no call logged? He called his supervisor. The supervisor sighed, and 5 minutes later an unmarked SUV lit up its lights and turned down my street. Loomis drew his arm back like he was about to hit me again, and right on cue, my whole living room turned blue and red, tires screeched outside, doors flew open, and somebody yelled, "Federal agents, nobody move!" The grip on my shoulders disappeared so fast I almost fell forward. One agent came through the front, one through the back, guns low but ready. They had that calm, serious look that says, "We actually read our own policies." Sergeant Bradley Loomis, the one in front, said, "Turn around, hands behind your head." Loomis started, "You don't have the right." But he didn't finish because they grabbed his arms, turned him, slapped cuffs on his wrists, and pinned him against the same wall he'd been swaggering against the day he put me on the tile. My little hidden camera caught the whole reversal. Him in my yard in the afternoon, me on the ground, his hand in my face, then him in my living room at night facing the wall, hands bound. I'm not going to lie to you, watching that footage later felt not good exactly, because none of this is good, but satisfying in a way I still don't have the right word for. That should have been the end of it. Right cop gets caught, developer gets exposed, homeowner gets an apology, everybody claps and goes home. But that's not how people with money and dirt on their hands react. They don't say sorry, they hire PR. Within a week, local talk shows were asking, did Jordan Price stage the incident for clout? And is social media hysteria destroying our brave officers? Ironcrest paid a media firm to cut my videos so tight they turned a 15-minute nightmare into a suspicious-looking 30 seconds. Neighbors who never spoke to me suddenly remembered me as angry and standoffish. One commentator even said, maybe he's using his race to shake down the system. Yeah, that happened. I wanted to hop on a live and scream, wanted to respond to every single lie, but my mom stopped me. She sat me down at our kitchen table, touched the bruise that was still yellow on my cheek, and said, your father didn't have cameras, didn't have lawyers, didn't have any of this. He had his word, and they buried it under paper. You have more than he did. Let the evidence talk, not your temper. So I stayed quiet in public, and we focused on the hearing. That room was packed the first day, some people there to support, some there for the show, some just there because they love a scandal. Evelyn started with a case number from 1995. She put up a blown-up copy of my dad's eviction notice and read it out. Unsafe structure resident refused to cooperate with inspection. Then she flipped to my report. Same phrases, different year, same officer's name buried in the notes. She showed photos of our old house with a blue triangle sprayed on the siding, then photos of 4 other black families' homes from the same period, same mark, same developer, same outcome. Our key witness, old Gerald Knox, was supposed to walk in next and tell the panel what he'd tried to stop back then. Instead, we got a call that morning saying he was in the hospital with a head injury from a random attack, in a parking lot, wallet and car untouched. In the hallway during a recess, I was standing there trying not to punch a wall when that same nervous clerk rushed up with another envelope, blue triangle in the corner. Inside was a thumb drive and a handwritten list of addresses from across the state, each one attached to a family name and a date, each one with that same little mark next to it. Knox's handwriting at the bottom said, your family is just one link. When he couldn't speak, those files did it for him. Evelyn loaded them up on the big screen and slowly went through them house by house, year by year. You could literally hear people in the room whisper, I remember that lady, or that's the street they redid with the townhouses. It stopped being my story and turned into a pattern nobody could pretend not to see. When they finally asked if I wanted to speak, I walked up to the mic with my knees shaking and said something like, "I'm not here to beg you to feel sorry for me because a cop hit me. I'm here because my father was written off as non-compliant so they could take his home. And 30 years later on the same land, the same words ended up in my file. If you call that a coincidence, you're not paying attention, and if you let it slide again, it won't stop with me." Between that and the hard numbers, the GPS log showing Loomis at my house with no call, the text from Ironcrest contacts telling him to keep it clean and handle the noise, the video of him smashing my camera hub and then getting cuffed by agents. His lawyers ran out of places to hide facing real time. He flipped sitting in an interview room with Donovan. He finally blurted out names and instructions like, "They told me to tidy up the block. They said the Price kid was making too much noise. He tried to say he didn't realize it was this big, and I told him straight through the glass. You might not have known the size of the machine, but you knew exactly who it ran over. You watched it happen to my father, and you learned I was the easiest kind of person to put on the ground." In the end, the judge sentenced him to years in prison. Assault, unlawful entry, abuse of power. The city tore up Ironcrest's contracts. The state opened a criminal investigation, and a commission was created so families on Knox's list could finally tell their stories into a microphone that actually recorded them. I sat in the back at the first session and listened to an old man talk about getting kicked out over a crack in the wall. A woman in her 30s explained how her kids bounced between couches for 2 years after they lost their place to revitalization. It was like hearing my childhood from 20 different angles. A few days after the verdict, I drove to the only thing left of my dad's house, a cracked concrete slab overgrown with weeds on a quiet lot. I stood there with a cheap bouquet my mom forced me to buy, put my hand on that cold slab and said, "They heard us this time. Not loud, just for him, and maybe for me." It didn't fix what they did to him, it didn't give him his years back, but it felt like I finally set something down he'd been carrying alone. I wish I could tell you that's where the credits roll. Hero wins, bad guys lose, city learns its lesson, but the world isn't that tidy. When I walked out of the last commission meeting, that clerk drifted over one more time, almost like she didn't want to but couldn't help it, and handed me a thick, beat-up envelope. Inside were documents from 2 other states, different company names, different city seals, same little blue triangle, same kind of language, same kind of families. Knox had scribbled one last note on the back page. "This system travels." So yeah, I got some kind of justice. Loomis is in a cell instead of my backyard. Ironcrest is finally answering questions they dodged for years. My dad's name is on the record as a man who was wronged instead of a problem tenant. But I also have this file sitting on my kitchen table, staring at me every morning, reminding me that what happened to us is part of something bigger. And that's why I'm telling you all this, like we're sitting across from each other, because I want to know what you think when a story like this shows up in your feed. A homeowner, a cop, a development project. Who do you believe first, the badge and the press release, or the person with the bruises and the old paperwork? Have you ever watched a family in your town just quietly disappear when revitalization came through? Seen a house marked up? Then suddenly it was condos, and everybody acted like that was normal. Tell me in the comments if you think what happened to Loomis was justice, revenge, or nowhere near enough. And if you've lived through anything like this, eviction profiling, being treated like you don't belong in a place you paid for. I really want to hear your story too, because I have a feeling my backyard is not the only one where this is still happening.